Hey there. Welcome to this deep dive. It's just for you.
Oh, wow.
And today we're going to be talking about the UN Oil for Food program in Iraq,
Okay.
which ran from 1996 to 2003.
Right.
Now, at first glance, it might seem like, oh, this is just humanitarian aid, pretty simple.
Yeah.
But trust me, it gets really complicated, and there are tons of accusations of corruption
Sure.
and political maneuvering. We
Absolutely.
have actually got a lot of different sources.
Okay.
We've got academic papers, we've got investigative reports, we've even got some opinion pieces
Oh, interesting.
with some really strong opinions.
Okay.
Get ready, because this is going to be a wild ride.
It's a really good illustration of how things that look simple can be really complicated.
Yeah,
So this was post-Gulf War Iraq,
right.
and the country was really having a tough time.
Okay.
They had all these UN sanctions against them.
Right.
The humanitarian situation was terrible,
Yeah,
really dire. So they came up with the Oil for Food program,
right.
or OFFP for short.
Oh.
So the idea was let Iraq sell oil,
Okay.
but all that money, the revenue, goes into an account that's controlled by the UN
Okay.
to prevent, Saddam Hussein's regime from
Right.
using it for anything other than like the essential goods
Oh, okay, so it's like
for the people.
to the people.
Yes, for the Iraqi people.
Right, right. So essentially like a way to make sure that the aid actually gets to where it's supposed to go.
Exactly. It seems pretty straightforward, but,
Yeah.
well, it's not.
But as we so often find.
It gets messy.
Yeah, especially when you start getting into the lead up to the 2003 Iraq War.
Yeah.
It seems like that's when all of these accusations of corruption really started to gain traction.
It became a political football for sure.
Yeah.
Some people were claiming that Saddam Hussein's regime was taking billions of dollars
Whoa.
through oil smuggling,
Okay.
which is outside of the program,
Right.
and also kickbacks within the program.
Okay, so how did that work?
You could think of it like surcharges on oil sales
Oh, okay.
and import contracts.
Right.
And then the money just went straight to them.
Wow.
And then there were even rumors of almost like a secret oil voucher system.
Like a loyalty program.
Yeah, basically like a loyalty program to reward people,
Wow. That's interesting.
political allies.
But it wasn't just the Iraqi regime that was catching heat. Right?
That's right.
There were some pretty serious accusations directed at the UN as well.
Yeah, some people were accusing the UN Secretariat, including Kofi Annan, who was
Okay.
the Secretary General at the time,
Yeah.
of knowing about these activities
Okay.
and basically turning a blind eye.
Really?
Yeah, some even went as far as to say that the UN was directly involved.
Oh, wow. So it was like the blame game was going on.
Right, it was heated. Some people even called it the biggest financial scandal in history.
Wow. Biggest financial scandal in history is a big statement. I definitely want to learn more about that.
It's quite a claim.
But with so many different stories flying around, how do we even know what to believe?
Well, that's what this deep dive is for. We're going to look at all the different sides of this story.
Okay.
First, we'll examine a source that really challenges a lot of those big claims against the UN.
Okay.
Specifically, Joy Gordon,
Okay.
in her paper called The Accusations Against the Oil for Food Program, the Volcker Reports. She argues that a lot of the accusations against the UN were exaggerated.
So she's basically saying that the UN wasn't as bad as everyone was saying.
Yeah, she's pushing back on that whole UN is the bad guy story.
So what's her reasoning for that? What makes her think that?
She bases her argument on the findings of the Independent Inquiry Committee,
Okay.
or IS,
I
yeah.
see. Yeah.
which was led by Paul Volcker.
Okay.
Now, they were specifically tasked with investigating the OFFP,
Right.
and they didn't really find evidence of widespread corruption within the UN.
Interesting.
They concluded that any problems they did find didn't really have a big impact on how the program actually worked.
So if the IAC didn't find massive UN corruption, then why were all these accusations so prominent? Like, why was everyone saying that?
Well, Gordon suggests that portraying the OFFP as this big UN scandal had a political purpose,
Okay.
especially for the U.S.
Okay.
Remember, this was right before the Iraq War.
Yeah?
And if you could paint the UN as incompetent or complicit, well, it makes it easier to justify going to war.
It makes it easier to justify intervention.
Exactly.
So there's like a motive there behind making those accusations.
Right.
It's not just about whether the corruption happened or not, but also about who benefits from those accusations being made public.
Exactly. You can't just take things at face value. You have to think about the context, the motivations,
Yeah.
the potential for someone to be manipulating the information.
Right.
Which leads us to another source
Okay.
that really tackles those politically charged narratives head on.
Okay, I'm interested to hear who's taking on that political spin.
Joshua Holland, in his opinion piece, Kofi and the Scandal Pimps.
Kofi and the Scandal Pimps.
Yeah. He does not hold back.
Okay.
He's extremely critical of what he sees as a very deliberate attempt by conservative media to change the facts about the OFFP to fit their anti-UN agenda.
It sounds like he's coming out swinging.
He is.
But what's his evidence? What's he basing this on?
Well, he points out that there was so much focus on the UN and their supposed failings, but people weren't paying attention to the role that the US and the UK had in designing the OFFP framework in the first place. He argues that the very structure that they created actually gave Saddam Hussein a lot of control over choosing contractors and exploiting, loopholes.
So he's basically saying, don't just blame the UN. Look at who set the whole thing up in the first place.
Exactly. And you remember that number that kept getting thrown around? Billions in illicit funds?
Yeah, billions and billions.
Yeah. Well, Holland challenges that too. He points out that the actual amount taken from the program itself was much smaller. It was around $1.8 billion.
Okay, that's still a lot, but it's a lot less than billions.
Right.
Yeah. So we've got two sources now that seem to be pushing back against this idea of the UN being super corrupt.
Yeah, but let's bring in a more neutral voice now.
Okay, yeah, let's mix it up a little bit. What have you got?
We have this very detailed report.
Okay.
It's from the Congressional Research Service.
Okay.
And the title's a mouthful.
Okay.
It's called CRS Report for Congress, Iraq, Oil for Food Program, Illicit Trade, and Investigations.
So this is coming straight from a U.S. government agency.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what does it say about all the accusations of illegal activities going on?
Well, it acknowledges that Iraq was involved in some shady business, for sure.
Okay.
Both within the OFFP and outside of it.
Okay.
But it also highlights a very important point. The U.S. government knew all about this stuff, especially the oil smuggling.
They knew.
Yeah, but they didn't do anything to stop it.
So the U.S. knew about all this smuggling, and they didn't intervene. Why wouldn't they step in and stop it?
That's where it gets interesting. The report suggests that the U.S. had their own reasons for looking the other way.
Okay, what kind of reasons?
Well, political and economic reasons.
Okay.
They wanted to keep good relationships with Jordan and Turkey, who were also involved in this whole oil trade with Iraq.
Oh, so all about maintaining those alliances.
Exactly. If they cracked down on those countries, it could have messed up other U.S. interests in the region.
So it's almost like a big geopolitical game, right?
Yeah.
Where these accusations of corruption are just one piece of the puzzle.
You got it. This isn't just a simple story about good guys and bad guys. It's about understanding all those hidden motivations and actions and what happens as a result.
Correct.
To illustrate this point even further, I've got one more source for you.
Okay, hit me with it. What's the final piece of the puzzle for this part?
This time, let's look at academia. Chiang Tai-shek and Enrico Moretti. In their study, did Iraq cheat the United Nations? Underpricing, bribes, and the Oil for Food program.
Oh, wow.
They take a really interesting approach. They use economic analysis.
Interesting. I'm not an economist, but I'm definitely curious to hear more about this. What exactly did they analyze?
They looked at whether Iraq was selling their oil at a lower price on purpose.
Why would they do that?
To get bribes. Think about it. Sell the oil at a discount and then get a little something extra under the table.
Oh, okay, like a secret bonus for giving a lower price.
Yeah.
Did their research show that Iraq was actually doing that?
They found them evidence that this underpricing was happening, especially when oil market prices were jumping around a lot.
Okay, so that's like another layer of potential corruption, right? This time through market manipulation. Were they able to estimate how much money was involved in these potential bribes?
Yeah, they estimated that Iraq might have gotten around $1.3 billion in bribes this way.
So we're talking about another significant sum of money potentially changing hands through these under-the-table deals.
Right. But here's the important thing. They also acknowledge that this doesn't mean the OFFP was a total failure.
Okay, so even with the potential corruption, the program might have still achieved some good.
Exactly. It's not as simple as saying corruption equals program failure.
It seems like one of the big takeaways from our discussion so far is that things are rarely black and white, right?
Right.
The OFFP probably had both successes and failures.
Absolutely.
And to really understand what happened, we have to look at the nuances, not just the attention-grabbing headlines.
It's about looking at the whole picture.
Exactly. And now that we've explored these 4 sources, each with their own take on the OFFP, I think it's time to start connecting the dots.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways? What patterns do we see emerging? And what does it all tell us about this complex and controversial program? We'll delve into that right after.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
All right, so we've explored 4 different sources now.
Yeah.
Each with their own perspective on the UN Oil for Food program. It's like we've got all the puzzle pieces laid out in front of us.
Right.
And now we've got to start putting them together.
Exactly.
What stands out to you as we sort of think about all these different perspectives?
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is how complex this whole thing was.
Yeah.
It was operating during political tensions,
Right.
economic sanctions,
Yeah.
and a huge humanitarian crisis in Iraq.
Yeah.
Every source we looked at just added another layer to this story.
It seems like every time we peel back one layer,
Yeah.
we just find another one underneath it.
Hmm.
So as we try to make sense of it all, what are some of the key takeaways that we can glean from all this information?
One of the biggest things for me is that a lot of the talk about illegal activities,
Right.
especially those blamed on the UN,
Yeah.
they were blown way out of proportion.
Yeah, I see that.
Especially in the media and political speeches. We kept hearing about billions of dollars
Billions?
in UN corruption, but when you actually look at it closely,
Yeah.
those claims don't really add up.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thread.
Yeah.
Both Joy Gordon, with her analysis of the Volcker Report, and Joshua Holland, when he's criticizing the media,
Right.
they both seem to be challenging that perception
Yeah.
that the UN was super corrupt.
Yeah, it seems like it was a lot more nuanced than that.
A lot more nuanced than people were making it out to be.
Exactly. And that leads to another really important point. Political motivations, how the OFFP was designed,
Yeah.
how it was run,
Okay.
and even how people talked about it
Yeah.
was heavily influenced by what different groups wanted to achieve politically.
It's almost like the program itself was used as a tool to score political points.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending on your perspective, you could use it to argue that humanitarian aid works.
Right.
Or that the UN is totally corrupt.
Exactly. And when we oversimplify things like that and just see black and white,
Right.
we miss a really important part of the story: who was responsible.
Yeah, it wasn't just the UN.
No, not at all. The U.S., other UN members,
Yeah.
they weren't just watching from the sidelines. They helped create the framework.
Right.
They knew about the illegal things happening.
Right, yeah.
And they often chose not to do anything about it.
And they had their reasons for that.
Exactly. Strategic reasons.
Yeah, like what the Congressional Research Service report said
Yeah.
about the U.S. knowing about the oil smuggling,
Right.
but not doing anything to stop it because they wanted to stay friends with Jordan and Turkey.
Yeah, it was all about protecting those alliances.
That was a big moment for me when I read that.
Yeah.
It really changed how I saw the whole situation.
Yeah, it shows how a country's own interests can sometimes come before everything else.
Right, even during a humanitarian crisis.
Exactly. It also highlights how important it is to look at all sides of the story.
Right, and to understand what everyone's motivations are.
Yeah. And not just focus on the people who are easiest to blame.
So when we zoom out and consider all this complexity, how should we judge the OFFP overall? Was it a success, a failure, or is it, as it seems, somewhere in the middle?
Well, that's a question that historians will be debating for years to come.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. On one hand, the OFFP definitely provided essential aid to millions of Iraqis.
Right.
People were suffering because of those UN sanctions, and this program helped them. We see it in the data. Improvements in child nutrition and health.
Right, so there were real positive outcomes.
Yes, absolutely.
But we can't forget that the program was also open to being exploited.
Absolutely not.
People used it for personal gain.
Right.
And for political maneuvering.
Exactly. And that raises important questions about providing aid when there's a lot of political tension involved.
Okay, yeah. What kind of questions?
How do you make sure the aid actually gets to the people who need it most?
Right.
Without it getting caught up in all the political agendas?
Yeah. And how do you balance the need to get aid out quickly with the need to be transparent and accountable?
Exactly. It's a tough balance.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
And the OFFP is a really good example of how difficult that can be.
It really highlights the challenges.
Exactly.
And that's why this deep dive is so valuable, even if we end up with more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's true.
It makes us grapple with all the complexities
Right.
instead of just seeing things as black and white. And it reminds us that we all share responsibility for dealing with these global problems.
It's a reminder that there are no easy solutions.
Right.
Now, before we wrap up this discussion of the UN Oil for Food program,
Okay.
I want to bring our listener into the conversation directly. We've seen how this program started with good intentions,
Right.
but ended up mixed up with political calculations and self-interest.
Yeah.
So to our listener, I want to ask, what do you think this tells us about how hard it is to give aid in conflict zones?
Yeah. What lessons can we learn from the OFFP's successes and failures?
Right. How can we apply what we've learned to future humanitarian efforts?
How can we make sure aid reaches those in need while minimizing the risks?
Right.
How can we make these operations more transparent and accountable?
It's a challenge with many facets, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But I do think that this deep dive has given us some valuable things to think about as we try to answer these tough questions.
Yeah, definitely some food for thought.
We've talked about transparency,
Yeah.
accountability,
Right.
and understanding the political and economic stuff that always comes into play.
It's about realizing that good intentions aren't enough, you know?
Yeah.
We need strong systems to prevent people from taking advantage of these programs
Right.
and using them for their own gain.
Yeah.
And we can't be afraid to have those hard conversations about the compromises
Right.
that might be necessary in these tough situations.
It's about navigating those gray areas.
Yeah.
Recognizing the messiness and always trying to improve things
Yeah.
for the people who need help the most.
And remember, this deep dive,
Right.
it's really just the beginning.
It is, yeah.
There's so much more out there
Yeah.
about the OFFP
Yeah.
humanitarian work
Right.
and the challenges of working in conflict zones.
But just giving you a taste.
A starting point.
Yeah, a jumping off point.
Yeah.
Now it's up to you
Right.
to keep exploring.
Keep digging.
Yeah.
Come to your own conclusions.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe your research
Yeah.
will lead to new solutions.
Right.
And a better understanding of how we can make the world a more just,
Yeah.
equitable place.
That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Sparking that curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Encouraging you to think critically
Mm-hmm.
and become a more informed and engaged global citizen.
So keep asking those questions, challenge those easy answers,
Yeah.
and never stop learning.
Right.
Because as we saw today, even the things that seem simple can be incredibly complex. And understanding that complexity is the first step to making a real difference.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
That wraps up our deep dive into the UN Oil for Food program.
It was quite a journey.
It was. I hope you found it insightful,
Yeah.
thought-provoking,
Mhm.
and maybe even inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep.